Hello, so for this video we're going to be talking about double crochets. This is a swatch that I made of double crochet here. So in comparison to the single crochet, this is what that looks like, just there. It's actually a bit easier to see the posts in the double crochet because they're nice and tall, so you can count your rows and count how many stitches you've got per row much easier. So we're going to start with our chain and build from that. But if you wanted to just work from your single crochet swatch, this is what I've done just before. I've changed color very poorly here just so you can see the difference. You can just work from your single crochet swatch, saves you having to make another chain and work into that foundation, and you can just kind of build up with your double crochets like that. But we're going to start with the chain so you can see from scratch what that looks like. So with our single crochet, we started off crocheting into 15 of our chains, but we actually did 16 to build up our edge. So to build up the edge for the double crochet, it's the same thing, but instead of crocheting into the second chain from the hook, we're going to move to the third chain. We want 2 spaces here because that's the height of a double crochet, and you want to make sure the edge is just as tall, because if you just did one, the stitch is going to end up at an angle and it's going to make the work all wonky. So we just want to bring 2 up there, and we're going to be working into the third chain right here. So with single crochet, we typically go in, we grab our yarn and come back out. But with double crochet, you want to bring yarn with you before you go into the stitch. So you want to go under the fence and grab your yarn before you go into the V. So now when we go into the V, instead of having 2 little loops, we've actually got 3. We've got a loop here, a kind of partial loop in the middle, and then a loop at the end. So this is what you want with a double crochet. So now with the single crochet, we would just yarn over and bring it through both of those loops. And if you bring this yarn through all 3, that is a stitch. It's called a half double crochet, and it makes like a chunkier single crochet, but we don't want that. We want to lengthen it. So what you do is you're bringing your yarn under the first 2 loops. So you're only bringing it 2/3 of the way. You're not bringing it through all 3, just the first 2. So we're going to go just into the first 2 like that, and then bring it up. So it looks like this. Now this can be a little bit tricky to separate it and bring it through 2, but you'll get the hang of it, and I'll show you some little tips for that in a minute. But once you've got 2 little loops on your hook, the stitch isn't finished yet, because remember how I said in our last video that the stitch is only finished if you have 1 loop left on your hook. So you have to get rid of this second one, and to do that we're just going to put our hook underneath our yarn and drag it through both, just like we were doing a single crochet, just like that. So the edge looks a bit wonky now because we've kind of got our border and our first double crochet right there. But if we go into the next one, we're going under the fence, or yarning over, underneath, bringing our friend with us before we go into the V. And now we've got 3 little loops on our hook. We're going to go under the fence again, bring it through the V, and now we're just going to hang out with our 3 mates here. So we're going to yarn under just like we were going to finish off our single crochet, but instead of bringing it through both of them, we're just going to bring it through 2, just like that. We've got 2 again. We've got to finish that stitch by going under the fence and bringing it through the tunnel, just like that. And that gives you the tall double crochet. So we're doing basically two single crochets in 1 stitch. And that's what gets it that height and that post very visible. So we're going under first. We're bringing a friend with us before we go into the stitch. Going into the stitch, grabbing the yarn, bringing it through. So now we've got 3. And now we're going to go under that fence again, grab our little yarn, and we're only bringing it through 2 of those loops. And then we're going to finishing it off with the single crochet at the end, like that. So it's very, very, very similar to the single crochet, but there's just an extra step. So yarning over, or going under the fence, going through the V, bringing that yarn up. So now we've got 3 loops, putting our hook underneath, grabbing it through 2, and then through the last one. So when you're grabbing it through and you're trying to bring it through all 3 like this, there's actually only, if you really inspect it, there's only 2 loops and then a kind of half loop like that. So you're not bringing it through 3, you're bringing it through 1.5. And it's not as, if your tension is nice and loose like this, you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So when my tension is tight, I'm just picking it up like that, and now I'm loosening it to bring it through that first loop, and we're kind of bringing it underneath that line there. So we've got 2 on our hook again, and then bringing it through. So it's 2 parts to this stitch, going underneath, 3, bringing it through 2, and then bringing it through 1. So we've got 1 stitch left on our hook. I'll show you a couple more times. So we're going into the V, into the V, just like with our single crochet. Oh, sorry, we're bringing a friend with us into the V, grabbing our yarn up. So with single crochet, you would have 2 loops, but now we've got 3 because we brought a friend with us. So then we're just going through 2 of those, half or 2/3 of that tunnel. Then we're creating 2 little loops up here, and then we'll finish that off just like a single crochet. So another thing that I'll mention as well that can help, if you have really cold and sweaty hands, so mine get really cold and sweaty when I'm crocheting, and it can really mess up your tension and make it really clunky, and if you hear that kind of squeaky, cotton helps with that. If you're crocheting with cotton, that can help. The other thing that you can do is run your hands under really warm water, warm them up, and then add some talcum powder. So a lot of the times when I'm crocheting for a long period of time, I'll use talcum powder, and my projects end up smelling like baby powder. But it really helps glide the yarn so it doesn't get stuck here in your cold, sweaty hands, and it doesn't get stuck when you're pulling it through, and the yarn doesn't get damp. So it's a bit gross, but if you've got sweaty hands, talcum powder is your best friend. If you're finding that it's still squeaking and the tension's really just, you're not having a good time, it could be the yarn. You could just try switching to cotton, and that might help you. But that's up to you. And so we're just going all the way to the end of our row, just like we did with the single crochets. So we've got, there's 2 parts to this double crochet. And we're going all the way to the end, just like we would before. Now when we get to the end, so with that single crochet, we only chained 1 before we flipped, but with the double crochet, we want to chain 2 because we want to get it to the height of this stitch. So we're going to go into that last one. Oops. So I just lost my stitch. So I don't have to pull my work out to salvage it. I just kind of pull out what I've done, and it gets me right to back where I started, and I can go back into that stitch again. Oops, yarn over. And then pull that back up. So before we flip our work and continue on, instead of chaining 1 like before, we're just going to chain 2. And now we can flip it. And now that's our first stitch that we're going to crochet into, yarning over, crocheting into that stitch. So see, now you can see that your V's are still there, just like with your single crochet, and you're still going underneath that V. You're still going underneath, just like with the single crochet. You're just bringing a friend with you first. So the spaces are actually much easier to see with double crochet. You've got that big wide open space, which is what you don't want. You don't want to go into there. If you do that, that's going to give you a different look. It's a different type of stitch. We want to go into that space right there with our little V legs on top, just like with the single crochet, and bring that through and finishing it up. So that one is, if you have a look here, if I pull that apart, we're just going into this stitch here, right there. In all honesty, this double crochet might actually be a bit easier to learn for beginners because you've got all this extra space. You can clearly see that there's the V right there, there's the space you go into, and there's the no space right there. So you might have a bit more luck with this double crochet stitch, as long as you're yarning over or going under the fence first. So this is what I mean. Sometimes this is a good example of the yarn kind of splitting and getting a bit weird. So if that happens, you just want to pull out that stitch and just go back to where it was all nice and clean at your last stitch right there. Pull it up, and then you can go back in, and it's like nothing ever happened. You can continue to go into that stitch. and bring it up. So when you're counting these to make sure that you've got 15 in your row, I'll get to the end of this and we can count it together. So we'll just go all the way to the end. You can see those posts much clearer, like I showed you at the start of the video. So it's much easier to count and see where you're up to. So we're just going to go all the way to the end. Almost there. So if you saw that, I accidentally pulled up way too much yarn there, and if I were to bring that through, it's just really having a hard time with that tension. So what I can do is just pull it, and it makes the stitch nice and tight again, and then I can readjust the tension with my hook by pulling gently to get it to the right size. All right, so we're almost at the end. So you can count your work as you go. So if we have a look now, we'll start counting these. So we've got one at the end. Now, remember how we started with the 2 chains going up? That's not counted as a stitch. These are kind of counted as one together because they're in one stitch. So that's going to be counted as one. So we've got 1 there, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So that means that we have 2 left to do to get 15 for this row. So 13, 14, and then 15. So the last one is right there. You can see that V. We've got that post just here. 15, there we go. And you can see at the end of this one as well, we've got those 2 starting stitches that we skipped. The number 16 and 17 right there as well. So that's the end of the row. Now we're just going to chain 2 and flip it over. And there you go. So then you just keep going all the way to the end and weaving your way back and forth as long as you like.